I got a great guy, and I got a great guest this evening. How you doing, Tom?
I am fantastic.
Tom Wesley, correct?
Wesley,
I just
yes.
want to make sure I pronounce that correctly because I hack everybody's name. Just want you to know.
Well, you're off to a great start.
Yeah, I know. Oh, you know, my daughter, I should have told you this off the air, and I don't remember the word. She'll call me right now. She'll text me she's listening. So she told me to come up with a word, and I just drew a senior moment for a minute. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll tell you later off the air. So 508-438-0965. We're here with the candidate for the 2nd Congressional District, which is one of the most weirdest districts I've ever seen. And again, I think that's where we're going to be talking about. I mean, that covers, you know, Spencer, Leicester, Oxford, Sutton, Douglas, Uxbridge, Northbridge, Upton, Milford, Mendon. I mean, talk about, you know, and then it goes out to Hadley, Northampton, South. I mean, you kidding?
It's like it looks like the Loch Ness monster.
This guy is going to run against Richard Neal. Okay, you're a Republican candidate running against Richard Neal for the 2nd district of the congressional district, of course, and which covers, you know, some pretty interesting towns all the way from, let's say, Bellingham all the way out to Chicopee in the southern part of Massachusetts.
Yeah, I like to describe it. It kind of starts on the western edge of 495 and sweeps west along the Mass Pike to Springfield and then scoots up north into that panhandle of Northampton.
Well, as a Latino Democrat, we call that gerrymandering. How's that?
You know? It's interesting you should say that because people, you know, it's not the worst district out there. If you take a look at John Olver's district at the 1st, it kind of wraps around the 2nd like a tumor, I like to say.
Well, no, I think the worst is Jim McGovern's the 3rd.
That's a serpent. So we have a Loch Ness monster and a serpent and a tumor.
Yeah.
That should tell you something about the state of Massachusetts politics.
Well, I mean, that's the typical, you know, redistricting issue, and I've been passionate about that issue for the years, and I think it's time that in this census that we take our time and redistrict it correctly, and if we lose a congressional seat, that's going to be interesting.
It's like musical chairs.
It's going to be musical chairs. Now, actually, that's a good question. If we lose a congressional seat, who loses what seat?
The last one to sit down, I think. I'm not sure how they're going to work that out.
That's a good question.
You know, it's supposed to be
flip a coin or
it's
something?
supposed to be an apolitical process.
Yeah, okay,
But you know what's interesting? I discovered that as a candidate, you do not have to reside within the congressional district that you represent.
That's correct.
You just have to be a resident of Massachusetts at the day of the election, which is kind of interesting.
Right.
And I thought about that. I said, that sounded a little fishy to me. But then I did think about the redistricting, the gerrymandering. I live in Hopedale, which is in the southeast corner of this district. And if I moved 3 miles east, I would be in Jim McGovern's district.
Right.
And I thought about that. So if they lop off Milford or Hopedale, I could just easily, if I'm successful in winning, as I hope I will be, they could gerrymander me out of my own district. So that's the reason how I suppose they don't.
Well, okay, I'm a Democrat. You're not taking over Jim's seat. You can run against Richard Neal all you want, but you're not running against my congressman.
Your guy.
My guy.
All right.
All right. So
actually, I hear a lot of good things about Jim McGovern.
Well, there you go. That's a good.
Most
a good
of them
response.
Come from you. Most of them come from you,
It's a good response on the Sam Rosario hour because if not, we're gonna have to throw you out of here. So, and no, seriously, let's introduce yourself. You're Tom Wesley. You're former military, right? You're not active in the military,
that is correct.
but you're a pilot in the military. You're an officer and a gentleman, as I like to say. Where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York. I'm actually,
Really?
I'm a second-generation immigrant from Poland.
Okay.
Both sets of my grandparents came through Ellis Island and took up shop in, about a mile away in Brooklyn. And my parents were born there. They met there, raised a family there, at least for a while. You can tell by my heavy Brooklyn accent.
Yes, I noticed.
I didn't live there long. We migrated east to Flushing, Queens.
Whoa.
Yeah,
There you go.
so
that's a long commute.
Yes, it was, and then actually we kind of trickled a little further east out to Long Island by the time I was 5 or 6.
Okay.
So, yeah, I grew up, in New York, and really, I think product of the American dream. But you're probably wondering, what is a Polish person like myself doing with a name like Wesley, which is probably one of the waspiest names on record.
You probably bought it or something, or what?
There was no eBay back in those days.
I don't know. You changed your name?
There was no domain name. Yeah, actually,
okay.
we were born Vasilevsky.
Vasilevsky. Okay.
And
Good.
all the uncles got together and said, it's awfully hard to make it in America with a name with that many that many vowels.
I think the only Polish I know is Glumkies. Is that right?
Grumpkins, we had
there you
some
go.
on Sundays.
there you go.
My mom came up and,
There you go.
and
That's
for
the only
Easter.
That's the only Polish I know, I think, except for a good friend of mine who's Polish. So
But my dad said, the uncle said that we want to make sure we have a waspy name. And my father said, that's fine. He said, but it has to begin with a W. And they said, why is that? And he rolled up his sleeve and showed him his tattoo, and he had his initials on his arm. And the second one, of course, was Vasilevsky, begins with a W, and said, whatever you pick has got to begin with a W. And so they picked Wesley, which is about as waspy a name as you can get.
We're talking with Tom Wesley, the candidate for the 2nd Congressional District in Massachusetts, which covers basically from Bellingham all the way out to Chicopee and, Northampton. So 508-438-0965. Call early, because if you got any questions you have for the next congressional, the candidate for district, for the office, you're more than welcome to call. But, I think you have a good opportunity. I hear that there's a lot of rumbling about Richard Neal. What's your take on the race itself? In terms of the candidate, why are you running against Richard Neal?
Yeah, well, I don't want to get involved in candidate bashing or incumbent bashing so much, but
Right.
There's a number of things when you think about it. He's been in office for 22 years, hasn't had a viable candidate in 12 years. So he's won 11 elections. He's been unopposed 7 out of those 11 elections. And I think, look, Bob Dylan said you don't have to be a weatherman to know which way the wind is blowing, and you don't have to be a physician to be able to diagnose something I refer to as Potomac fever. We send our politicians down to Washington, and they live inside the Beltway, that 10-mile radius that emanates from the U.S. Capitol. And they go down there, I think, with the best of intentions, as anybody, I think, would want to. But after a while, they stop reading the front page of the Washington Post, and they start flipping to the society pages and the social pages, and they start to wonder, hey, who's sitting close to the president? Who got appointed to that committee? Who's on Meet the Press or Face the Nation? Their yardstick of measurement is by their peers and not by the people who sent them down there. And I think somewhere along the line that disease has struck Richard Neal. And before him was a gentleman by the name of Ed Boland, who served for 35 years. So we've had single-party rule in this district for 57 years. That's a tremendous amount of time. And like I said, part of it's our own fault. For the last 12 years, there's been nobody on the ballot to run against him. So, there's a lot of confluence of things that happened that brought me to a decision to run. But if you look at those issues in particular, there was no choice. And I believe that he's lost touch with the general feeling of the people in this district.
What are you getting as a sense from the, I presume you've been door knocking and campaigning.
Sure.
And what's the general sentiment that you hear out there? Is it more of the, I hate to use, oh my God, I'm going to say it. I can't believe I'm going to say it. The Scott Brown effect type of thing? Or is it more of the, I think we're just enough of the same old, and it's time for a change?
Let me tell you a Scott Brown story. I'll tell you the first day I met him. It was back in, I think, late September, early October. And we were in just kicking off some campaign things. And I had actually given my first campaign speech back in June of last year. So actually, Senator Kennedy was still alive, and Scott Brown hadn't announced anything, obviously. And then now at that point in September, we had. I listened to him it was actually in Sutton at Waters Farm there. Had a really nice venue, actually, an old, almost Revolutionary War age barn that we were in. And he gave his speech, and he said, I'm a state senator, and as a result, I travel around the state a lot. And I see these things happening. He says, a year or two ago when there were 5 people at a particular meeting, this year there's 10. When there was 15, there's 40. And when there was, 40, there's 100. And now, in that day in Sutton, in Waters Farm, there were 200 people in this audience thirsting for some degree of change. And this was before he caught fire, right? Now, Scott Brown, when the polls came out, it was, I think, January, really, before the polls came out, and we started to realize that this was a real horse race. But he was sensing something back then, which I believe I'm sensing as well, and was sensing at the same time, that people are just fed up with not feeling as though they're represented, by any party, by the way. We happen to live in this Commonwealth, which is obviously, 100% at the time Democrat. But I think if you extend that across this country, you're finding an awful lot of people who don't feel as though the people in Washington really have their best interests at heart and are not really listening to them.